Welcome to Sermon TV. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 3 and 4. From my early childhood, I heard about the Antichrist. In the many years that I've been a Christian, I've heard people speculate that this person or that person could potentially be the Antichrist. However, although these individuals may have been forerunners to the Antichrist, none of them turned out to be the long-anticipated man of lawlessness described in the Scriptures. The Bible teaches us that at some point in the future, an evil ruler called the Antichrist is going to step onto the platform of the world stage and take the leading role for a short time in the affairs of mankind. Many predecessors of the Antichrist have already come and gone, but according to this scripture in 2 Thessalonians 2, the real Antichrist is still yet to be revealed in the last times. Paul tells us about the supernatural appearance of the Antichrist when he writes about the last days in 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 3 and 4. Paul writes, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God." Paul says that before the Antichrist can be revealed, first there must be a falling away that takes place in the world. The phrase falling away is taken from the Greek word apostasia, which describes a falling away or a revolt. The writer Plutarch used this word to describe a political revolt. In 1 Maccabees 2:15, the word apostasia is used to picture people who are turning away from the Lord. This word also occurs in the Septuagint version of Joshua 2 verse 22, where it conveys the idea of rebellion against God. Thus, the word apostasia is a word that denotes rebellion, mutiny, and defiance. Before the Antichrist can be welcomed with wide-open arms by the world, a change in society's mentality must first take place. Paul uses this word to predict a rebellion or mutiny against God that will occur in the last days. The text does not imply that this mutiny will occur within the church, rather, it seems to point to a change in society's attitude toward God. Paul points to a time when this evil leader will be revealed. The word revealed is the Greek word apokalypto. It is a compound word, using the words apo and kalypto. The word apo means away, and the word kalypto is something that is veiled, covered, concealed, or hidden. When these two words are compounded, they form the word apokalypto, depicting a veil that has been removed, exposing what is behind the veil that was formerly concealed or hidden from view. Paul uses this word to inform us that a day is coming when the Antichrist, who has been concealed and hidden from public view, will suddenly appear. In that moment when he suddenly emerges on the world scene, it will be as if a stage curtain has been pulled out of the way so that he can make his grand appearance. Next, Paul tells us that this wicked world leader will be one who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God. The Greek word for opposeth is antikimai, which means opposed to or against everything that is established. There is no doubt that this is a clear reference to the Antichrist. The word Antichrist means against Christ. Thus, the Greek word used in this verse tells us that this evil leader will be against everything having to do with God. It is important to note that the Greek grammar used in this verse paints the picture of a continual, unending, and perpetual resistance against the things of God. This is not just a one-time resistance against the things of God. Rather, this poisonous quality will be deeply ingrained in the character of the Antichrist. Everything in this evil ruler will be opposed to God and all that he represents. Paul also warns that the Antichrist exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped. The word exalteth is the Greek word huperero, which means to exceedingly exalt oneself or to be exalted highly. In this case, it is the idea of someone being exalted too highly. According to Paul, the Antichrist will go to all lengths to exceedingly exalt himself in the eyes of the world. As we continue to study this verse, we discover that this wicked ruler will even attempt to sit in God's rightful place in the temple and elevate himself higher than God himself. Paul says that the Antichrist will oppose and exalt himself above all that is worshipped. The word for worship is the Greek word sabasma, which refers to anything that can be worshipped, including God. Here we see that the Antichrist will attempt to stop the practice of worshiping God and demand that he become the primary focus of human attention and worship. Then Paul prophesies that the Antichrist will sit in the very place of God in the temple. The word temple is the Greek word naos. It is sometimes used to refer to the innermost part of the temple and may be interpreted as the Holy of Holies. On the basis of this verse, many scholars assert that the Antichrist will enter a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, where he will go into the Holy of Holies and decree himself to be God incarnate. Wasn't this exactly what Lucifer attempted to do when he declared that he would exalt himself above the very throne of God? Isaiah tells us of Lucifer in Isaiah 14 verses 13 and 14, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High." Following the long-held desire of Satan, the Antichrist will again attempt to take the very place of God in the temple. Paul tells us that the Antichrist will commit the ultimate offense of shewing himself that he is God. The Greek word for shew is the word apodynumi, which actually means to vividly portray, to point out, to illustrate, to show off, or to make a vivid presentation. This is the picture of the Antichrist using all possible means to demonstrate that he holds a rank that is even higher than God himself. In 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 9, Paul warns that the Antichrist will even employ supernatural signs and wonders to try to prove that he is God. He says, "Even him, whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders." The words, "with all," are from the Greek words en posse, which emphatically declares that the Antichrist will come with all power, implying that he will make his grand appearance with all kinds of power and supernatural displays. The Greek word for power is dunamis, which describes something that is explosive or dynamic. It is where we get the word dynamite. This means that when the Antichrist appears, he will come with all kinds of powers that are truly extraordinary in the opinion of the lost world. The Greek word for sign is semeion. This word denotes an act that points the viewer in a certain direction or an action performed to prove a point. It also means a beacon, a signal, or a sign. Just as a sign on the road gives directions to a driver, these supernatural feats are intended to point the attention and focus of the world to the Antichrist. The word wonder is the Greek word teras, and it is often translated miracles. This refers to something that causes people to marvel or to be amazed. The same word is used in Matthew 24 verse 24, where Jesus warns that false prophets will perform wonders in the last days to deceive and to draw people away after themselves. Here it is used to say that when Satan finally has the opportunity to introduce his Antichrist to the world, the evil ruler will energetically attempt to take the very place of God, even using lying signs and wonders to show that he is God. One important medieval thinker who departed substantially from the received teachings about Antichrist was the 12th century Calabrian monk Joachim of Fiore. Joachim formulated a view of successive past and future persecutions of the Christian Church that inspired him to propose the appearance of a succession of Antichrists, example Nero, Mohammed, and Saladin, before the arrival of the great Antichrist. As for the great Antichrist, according to Joachim, he will not be a Jew from Babylon, but rather the embodiment of the worst evils arising out of Joachim's own society, preeminently the crimes of heresy and oppression of the Church. Lastly, since Joachim expected the coming of a wondrous millennial era on earth between the death of Antichrist and the Last Judgment, he found himself obliged to foretell the coming of another enemy of God, a final Antichrist. Although Joachim was vague about the nature of this last antagonist of God, he referred to him as Gog, implying that the final Antichrist will be allied with, or identical to, the enemy forces of Gog and Magog, which will appear to do final battle with the saints after the millennium and before the Last Judgment. Revelation 20 verses 7-9. The expectation of the imminent reign of Antichrist in the later Middle Ages encouraged the belief among many that his forerunners were already in the ascendant or, indeed, that Antichrist himself had arrived in the person of a given ruler or pope. Such beliefs were attached in particular to the anti-papal Emperor Frederick II, reigned 121-50, and to a persecutor of ecclesiastical dissidents, Pope John XXII, reigned 1316-34. The tendency to identify a hated contemporary ruler as Antichrist in some cases outlasted the Middle Ages. The Russian Tsar Peter the Great, reigned 1689-1725, for example, was named Antichrist by his opponents, the Old Believers. Even in the 20th century, some commentators identified Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator, as Antichrist because of his attempt to revive the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, beginning in the 16th century, the fixation on Antichrist as a coming or present terrible individual gave way to the view of Antichrist as a collective body of evil. This position had been accepted in the abstract by some medieval theologians, but it was made concrete and popular by Martin Luther, who insisted that the institution of the papacy, rather than any given pope, was Antichrist. Modern Protestants have characteristically preferred to conceive of Antichrist as whatever resists or denies the lordship of Christ, though the idea of an individual as the Antichrist gained popularity among some evangelical and fundamentalist Christians in the 20th century. Roman Catholics have become less inclined to identify Antichrist as a specific coming individual. Please realize what a critical time you are living in right now. Jesus is coming quickly. Those who know him will escape many of these trials and temptations, but those who don't know him will be caught in the delusion and devastation. It's good to rejoice that you will escape, but what about those you love? What are you going to do to ensure that they escape the evil days that are coming upon the earth?